I woke up to the feeling of something heavy pressing down on me. For a few groggy seconds, I wasn't sure where I was or what was happening. My eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light spilling through the bedroom blinds. The nightmare I'd been having still clung to the edges of my mind, a suffocating dream, one that mirrored an old childhood fear. When my senses finally caught up, I realized the source of the pressure wasn't imaginary. John, my coworker-turned-lover, was sprawled across me, his chest half-crushing mine, his hips wedged between my legs. "John, get off," I muttered, shoving him sideways. He rolled onto his back, letting out an obnoxious snore as he settled into a more comfortable position. Still dazed, I tried to piece together how we'd ended up here. The last thing I remembered was the two of us celebrating at my place, killing time before we were supposed to head back to the office for the signing of the biggest contract in our company's history. We'd opened the bottle of wine I'd bought for the occasion, something expensive that paired well with the cheese platter I'd meticulously prepared. John had suggested we relax a little, and well, relaxing had turned into undressing. Before I knew it, we were on the rug in my living room, indulging in every cliché about office affairs. It had all felt so thrilling. Fast forward 6 weeks, this fling was no longer about thrill. It was routine now, like clockwork. We'd sneak away, knowing we could blame late-night meetings or travel schedules. But something gnawed at the back of my mind, even as I sat on the edge of the bed trying to fully wake up. Something felt off. The haze of sleep lifted abruptly when I noticed the faint light streaming in through the bathroom window. A glance at the clock on the bedside table made my stomach drop. 7:46 a.m. My brain stuttered, trying to process what that meant. We were supposed to meet the client at 6 p.m. yesterday. We'd missed it, missed the contract signing, missed everything. "John, wake the hell up," I yelled, shaking him violently. He groaned and rolled over, his face scrunched in confusion. "What's going on?" "We slept through the night, you idiot. The signing. We're toast." The panic set in for both of us. He bolted out of bed, staggering as he fumbled for his clothes, while I scrambled to find mine. I barely managed to throw on my blouse and pants, forget the bra, when something caught my attention. The front door was slightly ajar, held in place by the safety chain. A vague memory tickled my brain, a sound from earlier, maybe when I first stirred awake. The rattling of the chain. "John," I called, my voice low. "What?" he snapped, hopping on one foot as he tried to get his shoe on. "Did you lock the door last night?" He gave me a blank look, which was answer enough. As I moved toward the door to investigate, a shadow passed across the crack. Before I could react, something whistled through the gap. The sound of splintering wood and shattering glass filled the air as the safety chain snapped, and the door flew open. Standing there was a woman, Maria, John's wife. She wasn't tall, but she was built like a freight train and twice as intimidating. Her Mediterranean features were contorted with pure rage, and her chest heaved as if she'd just run a marathon. In her right hand was a gleaming axe. "You absolute piece of garbage," Maria bellowed, glaring daggers at John before her eyes flicked to me. "And you, his whore." John froze, one shoe on and the other in his hand, like a deer caught in headlights. I didn't wait to hear the rest of her tirade. I bolted for the stairs. Behind me, I heard John yell, "Maria, I can explain." Explain? Explain what? The axe she was now swinging into the banister? The sound of splintering would urged me to run faster. Halfway up the stairs, John shoved me forward, practically trampling me as we raced to the master bedroom. We slammed the door and locked it. For a moment, the only sound was our panicked breathing. Then came the thud. The axe hit the door, its blade splintering the cheap wood. John, ever the genius, stood there gawking while I threw open the balcony doors. My brain did a quick calculation, a 3-meter drop. Not ideal, but preferable to getting chopped into pieces. "Ladies first," I hissed, already lowering myself over the railing. I dropped hard, landing awkwardly but intact. John wasn't so lucky. He leaped over the railing like a sack of bricks, landed on his ankle, and let out a yelp of pain. I didn't wait for him to recover. "Get up. We have to go." We limped to the carport, adrenaline pushing us forward. But as soon as we reached my car, reality punched me in the gut. All 4 tires were flat. What the? A strange car sat in the driveway, its keys dangling in the ignition. Maria's car. I sprinted to it, throwing open the driver's door. "John, get in." He hobbled over, clutching his ankle. "I can't drive. My foot." "You've got to be kidding me." I climbed in, gripping the wheel like my life depended on it. Only one problem, it was a manual transmission. "John, how do I?" "Clutch on the left," he barked. He reached over, shoved the stick into reverse, and I somehow managed to lurch the car out of the driveway just as Maria came barreling around the corner. Her axe slammed into the windshield, leaving a massive crack. We reversed down the street, the car jerking violently as I fought to keep it moving. Finally, I found a spot to turn around and stalled the engine twice before John guided me back into motion. I didn't look back until we were speeding toward the freeway. Maria House, and her axe, were finally in the rearview mirror, but the chaos was far from over. The highway stretched ahead, offering a moment of calm that was entirely deceptive. My hands were gripping the steering wheel, and John was slumped in the passenger seat, muttering under his breath about his ankle. "Can you at least pretend to be useful right now?" I snapped, glancing at him. John groaned. "I think she broke my damn ankle." "She didn't break anything. You landed like an idiot." "That's on you," I shot back. Silence hung between us until he spoke again. "Do you think she slashed your tires?" "No, John, I'm sure the tire fairy showed up and decided to ruin my day for fun." John was rubbing his temples when he froze. "Wait, where's my car?" "What do you mean?" "I drove to your place yesterday." "Where's my car?" My heart sank. John's car had been parked right outside my house. Maria must have taken it. The realization hit us both at the same time. "Oh no," John whispered. "You don't think?" The sound of a police siren cut him off. I glanced in the rearview mirror. A motorcycle cop was tailing us, lights flashing. "Great. Just great." I hissed. "Pull over." John barked. I did as he said, the car screeching to a halt on the shoulder. The cop dismounted, took his time removing his helmet, and strolled over to John's window. "Evening," the officer said, his gaze sweeping over the cracked windshield. "You know it's illegal to drive with a windshield like that?" With these words, he approached the front of the car, apparently assessing the size of the crack and what it could be from. John opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the unmistakable roar of motorcycles echoed down the freeway. I turned in time to see a pack of bikers speeding toward us, their leather jackets emblazoned with a sombrero-wearing skull. The bandidos. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," John muttered, his face turning pale. The bikers slowed, and some turned their heads to look at us as they passed. A few of them crossed the median strip, heading our way. "Drive!" John yelled, panic breaking through his grogginess. "What about the cop?" I asked, my voice rising. John didn't answer. He reached out, put the car in first gear, and pushed my foot down on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, right into the cop. I screamed as the officer tumbled over the hood, landing in a heap on the asphalt. "John. Shut up and drive," he snapped, taking control of the wheel. We sped off, leaving the cop writhing on the ground and the bikers revving their engines in pursuit. The next 15 minutes were a blur of chaos. John weaved through traffic like a maniac, ignoring my screams and the blaring horns of other drivers. Every time I glanced in the side mirror, the bikers were there, closing the distance. Finally, John took an exit, veering onto a narrow country road. The bikers didn't follow, but that did little to calm my frayed nerves. "Where the hell are we going?" I demanded. John gritted his teeth. "Anywhere but here." We drove in silence for a while, the car rattling ominously on its last fumes of fuel. When we spotted a small gas station on the edge of nowhere, John pulled in. "You stay here," he ordered, limping out of the car to pump gas. I ignored him and headed inside, desperate for a bathroom and something to eat. The attendant was a bored-looking teenager who barely glanced up as I grabbed a bottle of water and some chips. I swiped my debit card at the register, but the machine beeped angrily. "Declined," the kid said. "What?" I tried my credit card. Same result. "You're out of money or something?" I ignored his snide tone, fumbling for cash as the sound of motorcycles roared outside. "Ma'am," the attendant said, his voice shaking. I turned and saw John waving frantically at me from the car. Behind him, two bikers had pulled up to the pumps, one of them already on his phone. I dropped the cash on the counter and sprinted back to the car. "What now?" I hissed, sliding into the driver's seat. "They recognized me," John said, his voice trembling. "Go now." On the road, bikers were on us in seconds. They followed close, their engines roaring as they tried to force us off the road. John clutched his ankle, his face pale with fear. "Do something." "What the hell do you want me to do?" "Throw them a bouquet." One of the bikers surged ahead, cutting us off. John's instinct kicked in, and he swerved to the right. The biker on his left wasn't as lucky. He veered into a ditch, his bike flipping end over end as he was thrown like a rag doll. The remaining biker slowed to check on his friend, giving us just enough time to escape. John let out a shaky breath. That was close. I didn't respond. My hands were shaking too hard to keep the wheel steady. For now, we were alive. But the clock was ticking, and I knew our luck wouldn't last. We pulled off the road as soon as we were out of sight, coasting to a stop behind an abandoned barn. John killed the engine, and we both sat in silence, the car ticking as it cooled. "Did we just kill that guy?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. John shook his head. He swerved into the ditch himself. "That's not on us." "Right. Totally not on us," I muttered, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Except we're the ones running from bikers, the cops, and your psycho wife." He didn't respond, just leaned his head back and closed his eyes. I could tell his ankle was killing him, but my sympathy had its limits. I turned to look out the window, my mind racing. This wasn't sustainable. We couldn't keep running without a plan. "We need to figure out our next move," I said, breaking the silence. "Where can we go where they won't find us?" John opened one eye and gave me a look that could have withered a cactus. "Oh sure, let me just consult my list of biker-free safe houses." "Helpful as always," I snapped. The silence stretched again until John suddenly perked up. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a police scanner, a cheap device that looked like it had been through a war. "What the hell is that?" "Maria keeps it in the car," he said. "She's paranoid about traffic stops and cops nosing around her business." "What business?" "Don't ask," he muttered, flipping the scanner on. The static crackled to life, followed by a dispatcher's voice. "Suspect vehicle last seen exiting Highway 87 near Hollow Creek. Units advised to approach with caution. Possible connection to biker altercation." I glared at John. "They're talking about us, aren't they?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. By the time the sun began to set, we'd pushed the car farther down the dirt road, out of sight from anyone passing by. Exhausted, we holed up in the barn, which was filled with old hay and smelled like mildew. It wasn't the Ritz, but it was better than sleeping in the car. John laid back on a pile of hay, groaning as he shifted his injured foot. "This is a mess," he muttered. "No kidding." I sat on a bale across from him, chewing on the last of the chips I'd grabbed from the gas station. The taste in my mouth, dry metallic, had been nagging at me all day. I hadn't thought much of it before, but now it stuck out, like a splinter in my mind. "You feeling weird?" I asked John. He squinted at me. "Weird how?" "Like, off. Tired out of it. I mean, I got an axe thrown at me this morning, so yeah, I'm not exactly feeling spry." I rolled my eyes and leaned back, letting the hay scratch at my shoulders. My thoughts drifted to the events of the past few weeks, trying to piece together where it had all gone wrong. Then it hit me. "John," I said, sitting up straight. "You remember how we passed out yesterday?" "Yeah. We drank too much wine." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I've drunk plenty before, and I've never blacked out like that. We slept for 17 hours. That's not normal." John frowned, his face a mix of confusion and suspicion. "What are you saying?" I hesitated, the pieces clicking into place in my mind. What if Maria did something? What if she drugged us? He scoffed. How the hell would she do that? She wasn't even there. I opened my mouth to argue but stopped short. He was right. Maria hadn't been at the house, at least, not that we'd seen. But the idea gnawed at me, persistent and unsettling. Maybe she had someone else do it, I said weakly. John waved me off. You're paranoid. We just drank too much and screwed up. Simple as that. I didn't respond. My gut told me it wasn't that simple. The next morning, I woke to find John gone. For a brief, blissful moment, I thought he'd run off, that I wouldn't have to deal with him or his baggage anymore. Then I saw his shoes still sitting by the barn door, and my heart sank. I stepped outside, scanning the area. The early morning mist clung to the ground, making everything look eerie and surreal. John. I called, my voice echoing. No response. My eyes caught movement near the car. I crept closer, heart pounding. As I rounded the corner, I saw him, rifling through my purse. Are you kidding me? I yelled. John jumped, his face going pale. I wasn't. Save it, I snapped, snatching the purse away. What the hell are you doing? I need cash, he said defensively. We're broke, and I thought. You thought what? That you'd rob me blind. His face hardened. I'm trying to keep us alive. I laughed bitterly. Oh please. The only thing you care about is saving your own skin. John stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You don't get it, do you? They're after both of us now. If I go down, you go down with me. For a moment, I considered hitting him. But then an idea took root in my mind, one that brought a cold, cynical smile to my lips. Fine, I said. You're right. We're in this together. John relaxed slightly, not noticing the glint in my eye. For now, I'd let him think we were a team. But the second I saw an opening, I'd throw him to the wolves without a second thought. The rest of the morning was a haze of tense silence and forced cooperation. John's ankle was swollen to the size of a grapefruit, so I let him hobble around while I scouted the nearby area for any signs of life. Nothing but empty fields and the faint hum of a highway in the distance. Our supplies were dwindling fast. Half a bottle of water and a crumpled bag of chips weren't going to keep us alive. But I wasn't thinking about survival anymore. I was thinking about leverage. It started with a small, seemingly innocent question. John, I said, leaning against the car. How much do you think Maria knows about us? He shot me a wary look. What do you mean? I mean she showed up with an axe, John. That's not just angry wife energy. That's full-on vengeance. Did she know we'd be at my place? He hesitated, then shrugged. I don't know. Maybe she's been suspicious for a while. Maria's thorough when she gets an idea in her head. Thorough, huh? I mused, filing that little nugget away. John shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to change the subject. But I wasn't done. Did she ever say anything? Drop hints? Leave any clues that she was onto us? He sighed, rubbing his temples. She's been acting weird for a couple of weeks. A little colder, a little sharper. But I figured it was just her being Maria. She's always been intense. Right, I said, nodding slowly. And you didn't think to, I don't know, tell me any of this before she almost murdered us? He glared at me. What difference does it make now? We're already screwed. I let the conversation drop, but inside, my mind was racing. John's wife wasn't just suspicious, she was calculated. If she'd figured out where we were and what we were doing, there was no telling what else she knew. And that's when the realization hit me. Maria didn't just want revenge. She wanted to burn us both to the ground. By mid-afternoon, we were back on the road. John insisted we head toward a nearby truck stop to get fuel and supplies, but I had my doubts. The more I thought about it, the more I realized we needed a drastic change of strategy. Let's split up, I suggested casually, watching his reaction. John's head whipped around. What? Are you insane? Think about it, I said. If we're together, we're a bigger target. If we separate, they'll have a harder time tracking us. He looked at me like I'd just sprouted a second head. No way. If we split up, you'll rat me out the second you get the chance. Oh, like you wouldn't do the same to me? I shot back, folding my arms. John didn't answer. He didn't need to. Look, I continued, softening my tone. This isn't about trust. It's about survival. Maria's out for blood, and I'm not about to let her take me down because you can't keep your marriage together. Low blow, he muttered, but I could see the gears turning in his head. We pulled into the truck stop just after sundown. It was a dingy, run-down place with flickering neon lights and a row of battered vending machines out front. John stayed in the car, nursing his ankle, while I went inside to scout things out. The clerk at the counter barely glanced up as I wandered the aisles, grabbing a few essentials: water, energy bars, a cheap burner phone. Then I spotted something that made me pause. A payphone. I stood there for a moment, debating. If I made the call, there was no going back. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this was my chance to flip the script. I dialed the number from memory. It rang twice before the line picked up. Hello. Hey, I said, my voice low. It's me. There was a pause on the other end, then a voice that was equal parts confusion and cold fury. Lynn. What the hell do you want? It was my husband. I need your help, I said quickly, glancing over my shoulder to make sure John wasn't listening. My help, he repeated, incredulous. You've got some nerve. Listen, I said, my voice sharpening. I don't have time to explain everything, but John and I are in trouble. Big trouble. Maria's after us, and she's not playing around. There was a long silence. Then he spoke again, his tone laced with bitter amusement. You're calling me the guy you cheated on, to save your sorry ass? Yes, I said flatly. Because you're the only one who can. I hung up the payphone and took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm in my chest. My husband had agreed to meet me, but his voice had been as cold as a winter morning. He hadn't asked for details, and I hadn't offered. This wasn't a reunion, it was a business transaction. Back at the car, John was slouched in the passenger seat, his eyes half closed. What took you so long? He muttered, wincing as he adjusted his foot. Grabbed a burner phone and some supplies, I said, tossing a plastic bag onto his lap. He peeked inside, pulling out a bottle of water and an energy bar. No painkillers? Sorry, I said, without a shred of sincerity. Must have slipped my mind. As John grumbled, I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. Where are we going now? He asked, his tone laced with suspicion. We need to keep moving, I said vaguely. I've got a lead on a safe spot a little further out. It wasn't entirely a lie. My husband had told me where to meet him, an isolated diner on the outskirts of town. He'd insisted on the location, probably because it was far enough away from prying eyes. John didn't question me further, too focused on unwrapping his energy bar. As we drove into the night, my mind buzzed with anticipation and dread. I had no idea what my husband's plan was, but I knew one thing for certain. He wasn't doing this out of the kindness of his heart. The diner was a relic from another era, with a faded sign and a flickering open light in the window. A couple of semi-trucks were parked outside, their drivers nowhere to be seen. Why are we stopping here? John asked, sitting up straighter. Pit stop, I said quickly, shutting off the engine. Wait here. John narrowed his eyes. You're not ditching me, are you? Relax, I said, forcing a smile. I'll be right back. I stepped out of the car and scanned the parking lot. Then I saw him. My husband was leaning against a black SUV, arms crossed and expression unreadable. His tailored jacket and polished shoes made him look like he belonged in a boardroom, not a dingy roadside diner. Lynn, he said as I approached, his tone clipped. David, I replied, keeping my voice steady. He straightened and took a step toward me, his eyes scanning my face. You look like hell. Thanks. You look great, as usual. Cut the crap, he snapped. What's going on? And don't waste my time with half-truths. I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. John and I got in over our heads. His wife found out about us, and she's not taking it well. She might have tried to kill us. David's expression didn't change, but his eyes flicked toward the car where John was sitting. That him? I nodded. David exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. So, let me get this straight. You blew up our marriage, and now you want me to clean up the mess you made with your lover and his psychotic wife. Pretty much, I said, crossing my arms defensively. For a moment, I thought he was going to walk away. But then a small, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "All right," he said. "But you're not going to like my solution." David's plan was simple, efficient, and ruthless. He insisted on separating us immediately. "The longer you two are together, the bigger the target," he said. John resisted at first, but David's no-nonsense demeanor quickly shut him down. "You're lucky I'm even giving you a chance to walk away from this," David told him. "Don't push it." I watched as David handed John a set of car keys. "There's an old sedan parked around the corner. Take it and head north. Stay off the main roads. I'll let you know when it's safe to come back." John looked at me, his eyes wide with desperation. "You're coming with me, right?" "No," David interjected, his tone brooking no argument. "She's staying here." John started to protest, but David cut him off. "You have two options: take the car and leave, or stay here and wait for Maria to find you. Your call." With a resigned nod, John took the keys and limped off into the darkness. When John was out of sight, David turned to me. "You know he's not making it out of this, right?" I blinked, taken aback. "What are you talking about?" David smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "I've already tipped off Maria about the car. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "You set him up?" "He's dead weight," David said bluntly. "And more importantly, he's a loose end. If Maria takes him out, it buys us time to clean up the rest of this mess." I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to argue, to protest the coldness of it all. But another part, the darker, more pragmatic part, knew he was right. "Now," David said, pulling out his phone. "Let's talk about your next move." The diner felt colder now, like the walls themselves were absorbing the venom of the situation. David's calm efficiency sent a chill down my spine. His face betrayed none of the storm beneath, but I knew him too well to think this was anything other than calculated vengeance. He tucked his phone into his jacket pocket, his gaze locking on mine. "Here's how this works, Lynn. You stay with me, do exactly what I say, and maybe, you get out of this alive. Otherwise, you're on your own." There was no softness in his tone, no pretense of lingering affection. Whatever part of him had once cared about me was dead and buried. "What's the plan?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound steady. David's smirk returned, a razor-sharp edge to it. "The plan is to make sure you never screw me, or anyone else over again." David drove us out to a storage facility on the edge of town. The place was deserted, the rows of identical steel doors looming in the dim light of a flickering security lamp. He pulled the SUV into one of the empty lanes and turned off the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, staring straight ahead. "This isn't just about John or Maria," he said finally. "This is about you, Lynn. About what you've become." I bristled, but before I could say anything, he turned to me, his expression colder than ever. "You thought you could have it all, didn't you? The husband, the career, the lover. You thought you could play everyone for a fool and come out on top. That's not." "Don't," he snapped, cutting me off. "Don't insult me by pretending you're the victim here." His words hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to argue, but no sound came out. David sighed, his demeanor shifting slightly. "You know, I could have forgiven the affair. If you'd been honest, if you'd been decent about it, maybe we could have worked through it. But you didn't just betray me, you mocked me. You lied to my face and dared me to challenge you." I swallowed hard, the weight of his anger pressing down on me. He stepped out of the car, motioning for me to follow. Reluctantly, I climbed out, my heels crunching against the gravel. David led me to one of the storage units, pulling out a key and unlocking the heavy padlock. Inside, the space was meticulously organized, rows of boxes, shelves, and a workbench with an array of tools neatly arranged. "Welcome to my workshop," he said, his tone casual but laced with menace. I stared at him, confused. "What is this?" "This," he said, gesturing around, "is where I've been preparing for this day." He walked over to the workbench and picked up a small object, a USB drive. Holding it up, he smiled. "Do you know what this is?" I shook my head, my stomach knotting. "It's everything," he said simply. "Every email, every text, every incriminating piece of evidence about your affair. But that's just the appetizer." He set the USB down and pulled out a folder from one of the shelves. Inside were pages of financial documents, photos, and what looked like legal filings. "This," he continued, flipping through the pages, "is the case I've been building against you for months. Embezzlement, fraud, even negligence at work. By the time I'm done, you'll be lucky to see daylight through the bars of your cell." I felt the blood drain from my face. You can't do this." David laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Oh, Lynn. I can and I will." He paced the room, the folder still in his hands. "But here's the fun part. I'm giving you a choice." "What choice?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You can cooperate," he said, leaning against the workbench. "Sign over custody of the kids, hand over your share of the assets, and disappear quietly. Or—" he let the word hang in the air, the weight of it suffocating. "Or what?" I pressed, my heart pounding. "Or I release all of this," he said, tapping the folder. "I send it to your employer, the police, the IRS, and maybe even Maria for good measure. Let her take a crack at you when she's done with John." I stared at him, the gravity of his words sinking in. He wasn't bluffing. David was always meticulous, always prepared. He built his career on being the smartest man in the room, and now he was using that same brilliance to dismantle my life. "You're a monster," I whispered. David tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Takes one to know one, doesn't it?" He tossed the folder onto the workbench and crossed his arms. "So, what's it going to be, Lynn? The easy way or the hard way?" For a moment, I considered fighting back, refusing to give him the satisfaction. But as I looked around the room, at the overwhelming evidence he'd gathered, I knew I was cornered. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "I'll sign whatever you want." David's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Good choice. Now, let's get to work." David didn't waste time savoring his victory. That wasn't his style. Instead, he went straight into execution mode, laying out the terms of my new reality with the precision of a surgeon carving away dead tissue. "I've already drawn up the papers," he said, pulling a folder from the SUV. "Custody transfer, asset division, and a non-disclosure agreement. You'll sign everything now, and then you'll vanish." "Vanish?" I echoed, my voice trembling. "Yes, vanish," he said coldly. "You'll leave town, change your name, whatever you have to do. But you will not contact me, the kids, or anyone else from your old life. Ever. Understood?" I stared at him, my chest tightening. This was exile. Pure and simple. "What happens if I don't agree?" I asked, already knowing the answer. David smirked, the faintest trace of amusement flickering across his face. "You don't want to find out." We worked through the night, hammering out the details. Every signature I scrawled onto those documents felt like another nail in the coffin of my old life. David was methodical, emotionless, and utterly relentless. When it was finally over, he handed me an envelope filled with just enough cash to get me out of town. "Consider this your severance package," he said. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" I spat, bitterness dripping from my words. David's expression darkened. "You think this is fun for me? You think I wanted any of this?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You destroyed everything we built together, Lynn. I'm just making sure you can't do it again." I looked away, unable to hold his gaze. Before I left, David made one final move. "Give me your phone," he demanded. I hesitated, but his glare told me there was no point in arguing. I handed it over, and he immediately removed the battery and snapped the SIM card in half. "From this moment on, you're off the grid," he said, tossing the pieces into the trash. "What about John?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. David shrugged. "If Maria doesn't get to him, the bikers will. Either way, he's not your problem anymore." I wanted to feel relief, but all I felt was emptiness. David drove me to the bus station in silence. The streets were quiet, the world still asleep. When we arrived, he didn't bother with goodbyes. "Get on a bus," he said, his tone devoid of any warmth. "I don't care where you go, as long as it's far away." I stepped out of the SUV, clutching the envelope of cash like it was a life raft. "David," I said, turning back to face him. "What about the kids?" "They'll be fine," he said, his expression softening for the first time. "Better than fine, actually. Without you around to screw them up." The word stung, but I didn't have the energy to argue. As the SUV disappeared into the distance, I stood there, alone, wondering how my life had unraveled so completely. Back in town, David's cleanup operation continued. The morning after he dropped me off, he met with his lawyer to finalize the divorce filings. By lunchtime, he'd secured full custody of the kids and transferred all the joint accounts into his name. He wasn't done. The USB drive containing my affair and financial misconduct made its way to the partners at my old firm. By the end of the week, I was disbarred and facing criminal charges for embezzlement. Meanwhile, Maria's rage burned bright. With David's anonymous tip-off about John's location, she tracked him down to the sedan he'd taken. The bikers arrived soon after, and what happened next was a blur of violence and vengeance. John didn't make it out. As for me, I stuck to the shadows, moving from one cheap motel to the next. The cash David gave me ran out quickly, forcing me to take on odd jobs just to survive. I tried to rebuild, but the scars of my choices followed me everywhere. Every time I thought about reaching out, whether to David or the kids, a voice in the back of my head reminded me of David's words, "You don't want to find out." He was right. In the end, he'd been ahead of me at every turn, dismantling my life piece by piece until there was nothing left. That's the thing about betrayal, it's never as clean as you think it'll be. And revenge? Well, revenge has a way of finding its mark.